Well, I think we've covered a whole lot of ground today. I would maybe go back and if you've got the time, or I would suggest let me go a little bit harder on that. Make the time to listen to this. Get some kind of old school notepad and pen, or new school writing pad, iPad or something, and make notes. And how can you apply what Greg and I have talked about today, and apply the lessons and maybe some of the stories to your own particular situation? Because it does, this conversation today, I can confidently say, has transcended a number of different categories. Thank you for a chance to visit with you. Thank you, Greg.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. You've heard it, everybody. Take action, write things down, and make a difference.
Greg Sheldon here, your host of Metal, Steel, Manufacturing, and Business Pro podcasts, where you learn everything about the metals and manufacturing industry that make your modern day life possible.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the show. Greg Sheldon here, your host. We are highly privileged today to have Hardy Smith, that comes from NASCAR and now speaks with people and motivates people and teams on nonprofits. And I hope we can get into that today, Hardy, about nonprofits and the difference between that and profits for board members, anybody listening. And, a whole bunch of other things. You have a wonderful book coming out, and, I've got a pile of questions, and I'm excited to get to know you. So welcome.
Hey, Greg, thank you so very much. Anybody that's excited about wanting to know me better and hear a little bit about the background behind Hardy Smith and the journey of getting to where I am today is, I'm always up for those conversations. So thank you so very much.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you. So tell us, what is it? How did it all start for you? Where are you from? And, the origin story of Hardy.
Well, the origin story of Hardy, I'm from Talladega, Alabama. So I know you said you're a big NASCAR fan, as are a lot of your listeners. And for those of your listeners who are in the sheet metal business, I've certainly been through a history of building and destroying a whole lot of sheet metal related products, right?
Yeah.
So being from Talladega, I actually watched the Talladega Super Speedway being built. I would go out and watch the construction, and so very massive, and wound up after college coming back home to Talladega and working in a small market radio station in news and sports coverage, which led me to covering events at the Speedway. And in those days, Greg, there was no ESPN. There was hardly anything of anything. So it was like 3 different television channels and not a whole lot of newspaper coverage for NASCAR. The only television coverage really was that 5 minutes maybe on Wide World of Sports. So the people at the Speedway were really interested in being very creative in whatever publicity they could generate. And the major radio networks at the time, if you can believe it, radio networks, would call the public relations folks at the Speedway and ask, hey, have you got anybody that could do some correspondent type reporting for us during the races? Well, they funneled all of that major network business. And at the time, there were also a number of major radio stations, especially in the Midwest, that really covered motorsports. So they funneled all of that reporting to this little kid, a young kid at the local radio station in town, me.
Okay.
And so I'm doing every NBC, ABC, CBS audio networks, AP audio network, UPI audio network, and all these big radio stations out in the Midwest. So during a Talladega race, any race fans from back in the mid 70s through 80s, you would hear Hardy Smith live from Talladega, and I'm just churning out these live reports. Well, at the same time, Motor Racing Network in those days wasn't nearly as professional as it is today, and being the largest independent sports network, in the country. Well, they only had one or two professional staff that traveled, week to week on the circuit. So Harry Howard was the engineer. Jack Arute was the network executive. Ken Squire was the main radio talent at the time. And then Barney Hall, of course, but they would pick up other, quote, talent along the way. So for races at Talladega, I was on the pickup crew. So I was the broadcast director for MRN for 5 years for all the races from Talladega. Now, to kind of set a time reference for you, Eli Gold was a hockey league public relations guy over in Birmingham, and was trying to expand his play-by-play experience. So he was one of the turn guys. Ned Jarrett, of course, had long since retired as a race driver, was trying to break into broadcasting and was a pit road reporter. Barney Hall was just getting started. Mike Joy was just getting started. Jerry Punch, who has gone on to major network fame, was actually a physician who worked in the hospital ER in Daytona Beach, and he was a PA wannabe. And so I'm really, all of those people, I'm kind of like the other Beatle, right? Because all of those, George, Ringo, Paul, all of those went on, of course, to major fame. And there's always a story about the fifth Beatle. We never knew who he, well, my wife says, well, Hardy, all of them became Hall of Fame rock stars in the broadcast industry. What happened to you? I don't know. But so in those days, that's kind of where it all got started. And then eventually I wound up working for the Speedway itself.
Yeah.
And then after a few years, as part of the team at Talladega, the France family moved me to the corporate operation in Daytona Beach, where I'm based now. And I was kind of the business of the business guy. My 1 or 2 sentence job description was to recognize potential problems before they existed, and then making sure they didn't happen. And if they did happen, I was to darn well fix them in a hurry. And so I spent 30 years in that world, working directly with the France family and all of the other great talents that found their way through the NASCAR world, in a great experience. So for at a very young age, I had these amazing opportunities that very, very few people ever have.
Yeah.
Kind of got me to, I eventually was able to start my own consulting business. And I wanted to do, in my focus is on nonprofits, associations, chambers of commerce. And I do for that sector what I did for NASCAR. I fix problems and help them move forward and achieve, success for whatever their mission calls for, with primarily a focus on boards and board engagement.
Yeah. Wow. What a story. Thank you for sharing, Hardy.
Sure.
So what do you think was what was the one thing about you that, kept you going in that? I mean, what was it that they saw in you that you kept doing? I mean, was it persistence, or you just a passion for it, love for the industry? What was it?
Well, that's a great question. And thank you, Greg, for that. For as far as a passion for the industry, my wife actually is a bigger NASCAR fan than I am as far as the show on the track. Now, what I am very much from the very beginning and still today very much a fan of is getting the show on the track. So everything behind the scenes, what it all takes, There's a whole lot of government
Oh,
interaction, there are rules and regulations and laws in Washington or state capitals. I worked in 50 states and had an office in Washington. And so I'm working all over the country, trying to help make sure the business of the business is going to be able to continue. But from a young age, as a young person in Talladega, the France family and the folks at the Speedway in Talladega, they saw a young person who was interested in not only the business, again, of the business, but also willing to work hard, willing to learn. And they took a gamble on me, and I like to think it paid off. And they really just kind of adopted me. You hear about the village raising the kid.
yeah.
I was one of those people that the NASCAR village really took me in and raised me.
Wow. Well, so it was like a family, really.
That really is. It really is. And NASCAR this week kicks off their 75th anniversary, which is it's really cool to see all that unfold.
Oh yeah, it is. Absolutely. I went to the Coca-Cola 600 a couple of years ago, and my God, I was blown away. I was just blown away. I mean, first off, the sound of the cars, obviously, but I mean, just the spectacle, right? The jets flying overhead, and I mean, just the amount of effort that it must go into it is just amazing. And so to be part of that, good job.
Well, thank you very much. And there is so much. And one of my favorite things to always do was on race day, to be able to, because the teams knew who I was and they knew I was from the front office, so to speak. So had great relationships. So when I got the chance to do pre-race tours for select individuals, it might be the grand marshal that day or the honorary starter, and to be able to take people behind the scenes and say, okay, if you, especially if they've never been to a race, those are the best.
Yeah.
Because all they think is cars going around in circles. How interesting can this be? Well, being able to show them here is how a pit stall is laid out. And here's why all these parts and pieces and equipment, if you'll notice, there's a pattern. And here's the reason why they're laid out the way they're laid out. And to be able to explain, here's an individual whose job is left rear tire changer. And, oh, well, that's interesting. I said, well, do you understand left rear tire changer is a profession? It's a job. And here's how much they make. And they work for like less than 2 minutes a day. I mean, there's a whole lot more to it than that.
Oh, of course.
All they see is a few seconds at a time from an audience standpoint. And then, didn't realize that. Yeah. And then take them into the garage. And again, one of my favorite things is early in the morning, the sun's just coming up, the garage is just being opened, and you're there with a guest for the first time. And you would see the typed up, printed out and taped to the fender of the car, the checklist, the pre-race checklist. And there's redundancy after redundancy after redundancy of every single thing that has to be done that morning to make sure that car is ready to get on the track and ready to go. And when they start hearing the background, of all of this and all the preparation and all the work that goes into, making a car competitive and a chance to win. And then, I have such admiration for those crews that build the cars, because when you think about it, they are fighting literally week in and week out, then the entire day during the course of a 400 or 500 mile race. And essentially cars are kind of equal and drivers, give or take, one or two exceptions, are kind of equal. Well, really what you're talking about, Greg, is you're fighting for not seconds during a day, pieces of seconds during the course of a race. That's what you're working to gain, a piece of a second advantage. And, at a Talladega or Daytona, for your audience that may not be familiar with it, when you connect distance and speed, you're talking about, if the speeds they're running at Talladega and Daytona, a football field a second. So snap your fingers, and at full speed, that race car just went 100 yards. So that's what you're trying to compensate for. It's incredible.
It is incredible.
Great business.
It is. And I mean, they're only this far apart, and that's amazing, right? And
it's amazing.
For somebody to say that the cars are just going around in circles is just the most ridiculous statement ever, right? And I remember being there and seeing the incline of the corners, which was unbelievable because the TV doesn't do it justice, right? And I mean, you could probably literally touch it and stand there and touch the incline.
Yeah.
So pretty.
Well, I remember when Jackie Stewart, who was a legend, legend in motorsports, came to Talladega and was doing, and I was there and showing Jackie around and giving him a tour. He was there to shoot a commercial for Ford. And so, my job was to, after the commercial shoot, and he had a chance to get a car out on the track for a few laps, a street car, and interview Jackie and just, for a news release about the great Jackie Stewart visiting the world's fastest speedway at Talladega. So my question was, well, Jackie, first reaction to being on the track at Talladega, I remember, Greg, vividly the response. He said, now this is broad daylight, understand, that he said, when you go into turn one at Talladega, all you see is darkness. And the reason you see darkness is it's 5 stories high of black asphalt. You don't see the sunlight. And he said here's one of the greatest drivers in the history of motorsports worldwide, and he was just really without words as far as being able to describe being at Talladega. So it's so much more than just going around in circles.
It certainly is. Well, and then like all the teamwork too, right? I mean, that's got to be inspiring. I mean, you were obviously working in a team, but also seeing those pit crews working as teams would be so foundational in your development, I would think, right? As for the other things that come in your life, would imagine that would be amazing to see.
And when I'm speaking to groups and relating the world of NASCAR to the nonprofit world and working, as you say, as a team, maybe as a nonprofit board or nonprofit staff, a group of volunteers, I'll ask them, well, here's the driver who in a Talladega or Daytona, they're racing at 200 miles an hour. And then all of a sudden they get the signal to come in to the pits. So they just remember your driving test back in the day when you took your driver exam, right? And you've got to come in and parallel park. Well, they have to go from 200 to 0 in a matter of seconds and hit that parallel space just exactly right, or there's a penalty. And then all of a sudden you've got a team of very talented, very athletic, professionally trained individuals who are jumping on the wall, over the wall, in all of the service. So you've got tire changers, you've got one individual who's jacking up the car, you've got another that's fueling the car, you've got another driver in charge of driver comfort, and that means giving the driver something to drink, maybe a new tear shield for the face mask. You've got another driver who's focused on the windshield. Now, back in the day, It was a very hard job because you had to lean over the wall with a long pole, take 3 or 4 swipes and clean the windshield with a big long squeegee. Now it's all just on tear off. So you've got to rip the tear off and you're checking the car to make sure it's okay, checking the engine, all of those things, talking on the headset about strategy, and boom, you're gone in a matter of seconds. So I'll ask the group and the audience, well, that happened to be a winning day for that driver, and he's the one in victory lane with the big trophy and the big check. Now, who's the most important? So is it the driver who drove the car? What about the tire changer, or the man who put in the fuel, who's only got just a few seconds to dump in a pre-prescribed amount of racing fuel? And as you go through all those jobs and the nuances of what they have to do in a matter of seconds. And then don't forget the guys back in the shop who are never get a chance to go to a race. They're building engines, they're building cars, putting all the parts and pieces together for races way down the road. Oh, don't forget, what about the truck driver of the team hauler who is driving all of that equipment? And it's millions of dollars worth of equipment.
Yeah.
But should something happen, heaven forbid, to that truck and that equipment, it's the time. You can't just replace all of that work. So who's the most important?
Well, I think everybody is. It's
absolutely right. And that's the answer. And they help. Okay. So in your business, maybe and I know you have a number of listeners who are running their own business, and congratulations to their success. But who's the most important? The CEO or the shop foreman? What about that just blue collar laborer? That's right. Who's banging out that sheet metal, who's working that machinery? Or what about your receptionist, who's probably the first person any of your customers come in contact with during the course of the day? And he or she is probably your number one sales asset.
Yeah.
And no one ever gives the receptionist the time of day. So it's the same thing. Who's the most important? You're exactly right. Everyone is important that's a part of a team that's successful.
Yeah. So what comes to mind as I do this presentation around, why an organization should know what they're doing, why they're doing it, and, how the financials tie into that. But what I talk about in that presentation is success leaves clues. And what that is these big names that you know of in sports, right? And actually I didn't mention any NASCAR racers in there, but I should now that we're talking. But what do they all have in common? And that is practice, right? And, I would imagine that these guys are always practicing, right? And my argument is, why can't you practice in your business to continue Absolutely. To be a better version of yourself, right? So
Absolutely.
Practice is key. Is that right?
Absolutely. And in the world of NASCAR racing, and I kind of bring to, and this is why I'm kind of a different voice, a different resource, and certainly a different personality in the world of nonprofits, because I'm not a nonprofit social sector lifer, although I've had a lifetime of involvement with many, many nonprofits and associations across the country. But I just blame my background, my training, and my approach on my NASCAR experience, which means I'm really kind of a pragmatic contrarian. I'm going to challenge. I have to know why, and then how to make it better. So when you think about, teams and businesses getting better, and it's a constant. Well, in the world of NASCAR racing, you win the race on a given day. Well, what's the first thing that happens? You're going to get that shop car back to the shop as quick as you can, and you're going to immediately tear it apart, tear the engine apart, nut by nut, bolt by bolt. You're going to get the car all apart in parts and pieces, because why? You want to find out, why the heck did we win? What did we do right? So you can replicate it the next week. And then, like Ricky Bobby says, if you didn't finish first, you finished last. So second through, second through last place in Talladega Nights, you're considered a loser. Well,
that is true.
A little bit of a truism in NASCAR because it's just first place and that's it. Well, every single team, second place through all the way back to the last place car, wants to they tear their cars down too, because they want to find out what went wrong and make sure they don't repeat it. So one of the the things that happens in addition to practice, because again, those pit crews are relentless. Now, back in the day, when NASCAR, a bunch of good old boys, and they would just, run what you brung to the racetrack. And that's just kind of the way it was right back in the day. Well, and then, we're going down to Daytona for speed weeks. And hey, Greg, you're my neighbor. You like NASCAR racing. I tell you what, would you like a trip to the beach? You can come hang out with us. And hey, if you want to be on the pit crew, you can be on the pit crew. And that's kind of what they did back in the day. But now fast forward to present day, again, left rear tire changer is a profession, and athletes are recruited. And there are certain physical nuances that, footwork, speed, strength, dexterity, coordination, the mental and emotional abilities to handle situations when it all goes wrong. Because we've seen this last year, tires were literally melting on the rims of the car, and in pit stops they couldn't get the wheels off, and so you're again football field a second. So every second that goes by, you're scratching your head. What the heck are we supposed to do? You've just lost another 100 yards. So, thinking fast on your feet and being creative. So all of those things are personality and physical characteristics that are being sought. And then when you put that team together, they are relentless in their practice and development. I just saw pictures this last week, by the way, of one of the teams I follow closely about their new human performance center. Okay. And it's you would think it's an NFL or NBA strength and conditioning center. Well, it's going to replicate exactly that. So they are strength and conditioning and endurance, dietary, nutritional habits, all of those things goes into it. In addition to just the practice. Again, why? You're trying to find pieces of seconds. That's the prize. And in sports, how often, do you see when they talk about dynasties? Well, there's never been a dynasty in any sport that lasted forever.
No, that's
Even
right.
Even the greatest teams, the Boston Celtics or the New York Yankees or the Oakland A's or, the Green Bay Packers, eventually their run at the top ends. In college football, oh my gosh, Alabama lost 2 games in 1 year and they were back-to-back losses. And oh my gosh, what in the world happened to the Alabama Crimson Tide? I don't know. It's unbelievable. But the point is, it's hard getting to the top. It's even harder staying at the top. And that certainly applies to the business world as well. So you've got to make sure you're constantly recruiting good people, replacing the people that have moved on to another opportunity or maybe retired. You've got to find new technology. Well, what you did to maybe make a little bit of a connection with your manufacturing audience. At one time in the Hardy Smith journey, there was a deviation, and I worked for a ductile iron foundry in my hometown of Talladega. Now I didn't know I'm certainly not a metallurgist, certainly know nothing about manufacturing. They wanted me because of my community engagement.
Wow.
And opportunity to be involved in sales and things like that, public relations. but that particular operation was over 100 years old back then.
Oh, wow.
And it was
Yeah.
dirty and dark and dusty.
Yeah.
By hand, molds by hand, handmade molds. And that whole business, even then, was so far beyond where that little small operation was. It eventually, went by the wayside. But it's you have to continuously update, and not only keep up with, you've got to stay ahead.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. I agree. I mean, it seems that nobody can ever stay on top forever, but you have a better chance by doing what you just said. Absolutely.
Well, and you may not be on the peak, but you want to minimize the low point, so you don't want to completely collapse. So there are sports teams again. You'll have teams that are winning championships one year and nowhere to be seen the next. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that, but a lot of things are out of their control. But the point is, from a business standpoint, there are going to be highs and lows. The key is to minimize the lows. Yeah.
Well, I look at corporations like General Electric, right? I mean, were a screaming success for so long, and then there was some, obviously Jack moved on, and there's that whole story, but also just some hubris at the top, right? Was part of the problem, right? So that can be a big reason for that, is people not staying humble, so anyway, let's get into nonprofit. I mean, what got you into nonprofit? Why is that interesting to you? And if we could define the difference between nonprofit and for-profit, would be wonderful.
Well, sure. Let's do the second part first, because that's really easy to explain.
Okay.
The difference between nonprofits and for-profits. Nonprofits are a business. So nonprofit is a tax status. And unfortunately, there's a whole lot of folks in the not-for-profit world that just don't quite understand that. And they feel like that they're in the business of just doing good. Well, they are, but they kind of lose focus that, well, as long as I'm just doing good and I've got good intentions, I don't have to worry about the things like a successful business does, like recruiting good talent, developing my staff, investing in professional development, recruiting the right board members, strategic planning. That's a whole, don't get me started, please, on that. That's a whole nother topic, and the dysfunctionality around that in the world of nonprofits. So that really is the difference. Is tax status. There's some pretty big not-for-profits. Now, the NFL is a nonprofit.
Okay.
So I mean, it's a nonprofit. Major hospitals are nonprofits.
So
Goodwill Industries is a nonprofit, and that's like $1 billion a year business.
Yeah. So can I just to test it, I guess. Sure. So nonprofit, I mean, you still have to make money, correct? The corporation still has to make money to be sustainable, right? It's just that people are getting paid in different ways, right? So you could be a salaried position or X amount of salaried positions, but it doesn't mean that things are free or there's no a benefit at the end of the year. So is that, so let's say, do you have to spend all the money in the corporation to eliminate the profit, or is it just the tax reason?
Well, on the, from a for-profit, in the for-profit sector, if you're a publicly owned company, you're responsible to your shareholders, and your responsibility is to make money for the shareholders. So that's a whole nother conversation. I'm not qualified to really speak really to that, but that's who you're in business for, is the shareholders. Now, how you go about, what you do and the products you make or the services you provide, all those things. But it's your shareholders, and they're looking for a return on their investment. In the nonprofit world, the shareholders, if you will, are is the constituency your nonprofit represents.
Okay.
So board members who have a governance and fiduciary responsibility are looking out for the best interest of their shareholders, which again is the constituency of those they represent, such as a particular nonprofit could be environmentally related. So is the nonprofit doing what it should be doing, raising money and investing those funds to help enhance the environment? And of course, there are individual nuances of, environment's a pretty broad topic.
Sure it is.
You could be in human services, you could be in healthcare, you could be working with kids, you could be working with animals. I mean, it just, the list of potential involvement in the nonprofit world is literally endless. In the United States, to help put it in perspective, Greg, there are about 1.8 million nonprofits.
Wow.
In this country. In the United States, we're a little bit unique with the rest of the world as far as having nonprofits and how nonprofits function. It's something that's, again, one of the bright things about this country that many other countries do not have. Nonprofits help fill the gap in a whole lot of social service related needs, for example. But so to get to the first part of the question is, while corporations, again, especially publicly owned, are profit driven, and I would imagine most privately owned corporations are profit driven also. They have shareholders and stockholders. It may be a family, but they do have an interest in a financial interest in making sure they're being successful. Well, in the world of nonprofits, yes, to be sustainable, yes, they've got to have an income, and how they spend their money is somewhat regulated. There's a whole lot of oversight that goes into making sure how funds are raised and how they're spent or invested, and they're following their stated purpose, aligning with their mission, whatever. When you apply for a nonprofit tax status, you do list in your filings, what is the purpose of your organization. So you can't just, if you say your nonprofit is about serving the needs of secondary schools, for example, it's an education related foundation. Well, then you can't go off on unrelated tangents. So there's a whole lot of oversight that's involved there. One of the things that creates roadblocks in the nonprofit world is that there's this, unfortunately, a big argument, a debate over overhead expense. So it's a little bit kind of crazy, isn't it, that in the world of nonprofits, if you're and nonprofits can be, into the millions of dollars as far as the size of their operation. Even local organizations can get to be pretty big. Well, your CEO that's running that organization is responsible for an organization with several millions of dollars of a budget. If that same individual were to cross the line and go into the corporate world, the for-profit world, with an equal size from a revenue standpoint, they would be paid accordingly, commensurate with the job they're doing. So back over to the nonprofit side, a lot of times, oh goodness gracious, we're paying this person this much money. That's ridiculous. All our money should go into the mission. We shouldn't have overhead. So the whole challenging question about overhead is kind of one that kind of handicaps nonprofits, if you will. And so they're not really public scrutiny. Their board members, their volunteers will complain if all of a sudden staff overhead costs are too high, or the building seems to be too fancy, or what, you bought a new computer system? I mean, why can't you use what you bought 20 years ago? What, it still works, right? Well, what I bought last week is already
yeah.
So, I mean, there's a whole lot about the cost of doing business that tends to cause nonprofits to kind of lag behind. So they're, in a lot of cases, they're just not able to reach their full potential,
right,
because of all this, if all this makes sense.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. So is there a lot of transparency in nonprofits, between do they have to be?
Absolutely.
They
Absolutely.
do. Okay.
Yes. And it depends on state to state, from a local and state organization. Every one of the 50 states is going to have different rules and regulations. The Internal Revenue Service, IRS, closely monitors nonprofits. Nonprofits have an annual filing called the 990 form that's submitted. So you have to submit your revenues, your expenses, and also the media tends to look out for nonprofits that they can find that are misbehaving, not acting according to what their mission says. All those kind of things. So there's a careful eye on the world of nonprofits for sure.
Well, there you go. So when it comes to, you talk about on your website about board members, and I'm curious about that process. Like, how do these people get? I guess let's talk about the nonprofit. Like when you're starting one, right? Do you typically have one person that's got an idea? I'm guessing one or two or three people, and then how do they define that board, and how do they keep that board engaged?
Oh, wow. So if we can come up with the answer here in just a few minutes, you've hit the holy grail, you found the holy grail for nonprofits. And I do share the answers and Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game. That's the secret sauce that the book offers from the board member perspective on why they don't do what they're supposed to do.
Right.
So in the beginning, let's say we have a startup nonprofit.
Yeah.
And nonprofits, Greg, go through kind of life cycles of development. They'll start out and quite likely will have a board that's an all hands on board. Just the board members are just doing everything. They're just like super volunteers, and they're sharing the passion of getting started.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and they might be involved in fundraising if that's one of the tasks that they're being asked to do. So as the organizations move forward and mature, the board members themselves typically will become, and more staff is added to the organization. So staff kind of replaces, or more full-time volunteers even will replace board members in those roles. And board members can move into what I call high value assets, and they become more strategic minded, more visionary, seeing into the future proofing the organization, anticipating, finding answers to the what if questions.
Mm-hmm.
And in today's day and time, there are certainly a whole lot of what if questions.
No kidding.
For everybody in business or nonprofits, right?
Yeah.
So the board's kind of mature. So in the beginning, you're probably looking for board members who just share the passion for the organization.
Okay.
And then as you move forward, probably going to look for board members who have particular expertise. So remember the pit crew when I was saying, hey,
yeah,
Greg, you're my neighbor, and come on down to Daytona with me, and you can maybe change tires, or and maybe go to the beach when we're done or something, And I didn't tell you we're going to sleep 10 to 1 motel room, back in the day. So fast forward to now, and we were talking about left rear tire changer. Well, the same thing with nonprofits. So now you may be looking for board members who have an expertise in computer hardware, software. You may be looking for board members who have an expertise in mergers and acquisitions, because your nonprofit is elevated to a point where it could consider possibly a merger with another nonprofit that's providing similar services. Expertise in finances, expertise in governmental relations, all the different aspects of what your organization needs to be good at to be successful and sustainable. So that kind of develops over a period of time, and you're looking for board members. So the board members that you had maybe 10 years ago, great individuals, highly qualified for that period 10 years ago, but now fast forward to now, okay, we need a different set of skills.
Yeah.
And we're trying to elevate, we're growing the organization. So we've gone from startup to another whole level. So that's kind of how it all evolves. The best way to keep your board members involved is treat them as high value assets. Don't just continuously ask them for money. Don't treat them like they're ATMs or ask them to continuously raise money. It's okay to do some of that, but if that's all they feel like they're good for is just writing more checks, you're probably not going to have them around very long. Get their opinions. Take advantage of their experiences in the for-profit world where they're probably from, right? And see what they can teach you. And when they're talking and communicating, listen to them and demonstrate to them that they are being listened to and appreciated. And another key thing is just simply, if you want a board member to stay involved, Greg, create a good, positive board member experience so that they enjoy participating in meetings, that your meetings matter, that something is going to happen, impact, results are going to come from every single meeting. Attending your board meetings are not a waste of time, in their opinion, because they're busy people. They're high value assets.
Yeah.
So those are some of the keys.
Okay. Very good. Thank you. Appreciate it. So speaking, when you started speaking in front of groups, and I'm curious how that evolution happened for you. Was it always something that came to you, or, because some people just have a knack for it and they're just comfortable. Others aren't. For me, it was a struggle. Still is, So I'm just curious, how that went for you. Because, that is certainly a part of being a consultant and all that stuff. So.
Well, not all consultants are speakers, and not all speakers are consultants. So those are kind of two avenues that I guess over a lifetime of experience have become very natural for me. And I was probably that kid in school that the teacher was constantly, okay, Marty, not now, because I wanted to talk, and I like to talk, and I was going to talk. So probably from a very early age, I was going to be a talker. So it's just getting to the point where you're getting paid well to do it. But all through the journey along, I've just always been a speaker in representing the organizations that I worked for. When I was at the Speedway in Talladega, I would go all over on speaking tours and promoting the Speedway, and civic groups and whoever would let the Speedway come and do a program.
Yeah.
Speaking for NASCAR, representing NASCAR all over the country, constantly speaking in front of groups. And just been involved in civic organizations, and again all over the country. And then all of that evolved into becoming a member of the National Speakers Association, and that's the organization for professional level speakers, which I am today.
Wow, awesome.
So it's just a whole lot of fun, and I would share a couple of very easy, very simple tips for yourself and anybody.
I was just going to ask. Thank you.
Speak in public. That is one of the number one fears.
Yeah.
Probably more people that are less afraid of snakes and spiders than they are speaking in public.
Absolutely.
Well, the main thing, number one, is know your material. Know what it is. So it's in your situation, I can tell what it is you want to talk about. So you have that background. So have the confidence. Yeah. And when you're telling stories, and just like in the book, Stop the Nonprofit Board Blame Game, whether it's written, I'm writing articles, or in the book, or speaking, I'm talking about a whole lot of things that other people talk about, but there is no one on the planet who has my take or who has had my experience working. And a lot of people have worked for NASCAR.
Yeah. Talk
about all that, but I'm the only one that's had my experience, right? And then the other thing is, in addition to just knowing what you're talking about, is just practice. And the more you speak, the better you're going to get. And it just comes with practice.
Yeah.
So, having a little structure, so a third bonus round tip would be, you're going to speak to a certain audience. You've got your topic, and then have 2 or 3, maybe 4 at the most, but 3 is a good number. Key message points that you're going to speak, or 3 lessons that you're going to share, and then kind of build. That's the structure you build around. So have a personal story or 2 that you can relate to the lesson. Throw in a how to do what you're talking about, and have a good open and have a good close, and there you go. That's the sequence, period.
Awesome. And practice.
Recircle back to practice. Yes. Just like those pictures.
Yeah, exactly. And I've found that confidence comes from doing it also, from the practice, from, getting in front of people or whatever,
absolutely.
The confidence comes with that. I mean, I did Toastmasters before COVID, and that kind of shut it down, but the confidence that came from that was priceless.
Toastmasters is a tremendous organization.
Yeah.
And Toastmasters and National Speakers Association are very closely aligned. They have a very, very close relationship. They work closely with each other. Toastmasters is more about the crafting, and the National Speakers Association is certainly about the crafting, but it's more toward the business of the business. So you see that kind of aligns with my whole NASCAR thing about the business of the business.
Yeah.
But in a whole lot of professional speakers got started in Toastmasters and still maintain their Toastmasters involvement. Stay quite active in Toastmaster organizations, and that's kind of like stand-up comedians like the Jerry Seinfelds of the world go to pop into open mic nights, and practicing one new material, new one-liners. Well, the same thing with speakers and Toastmasters. That's an opportunity to develop new material. So from the beginner all the way through the professional speaker, Toastmasters is a great, great opportunity for any speaker wannabes.
Yeah, exactly. And then fake it till you make it. You'll be a wannabe, and then you'll be a speaker.
That's it.
I think, I want to hear about the book. Tell me about the book. What do we talk about in the book, and where can people find it?
Well, very simply, they're in the world of nonprofits. The issue of board engagement Now that can kind of go two ways. Boards are either not involved or engaged enough, or in some cases they're engaged too much.
Oh, really?
Which means they cross the line from strategic oversight into management. So the management side of the line that's the responsibility of staff. Board members are not supposed to cross that line. They give guidance and then get out of the way.
Yeah.
But in the world of nonprofits, I've seen over a long period of time, there is a tremendous amount of frustration associated with board members and not doing what they're supposed to do. Well, that's the whole premise of my book. And it answers the question, why don't board members do what they're supposed to do? Now, what's different about this particular book and why it's become an Amazon bestseller, is just going like great and making a big difference now for nonprofits and associations across
Good.
Very simply, Greg, because I'm not offering what there's a good supply of, is advice from professional staff about board member behaviors and how to fix their behaviors. My insight is based on that of the board member perspective. So the genesis of the book was a nationwide survey I did. Now, I don't profess to be an academic. I'm not a professional researcher, and I share that in the book. It was a very crude, just kind of circumstantial project that I just kind of worked my way into by trial and error, but came up with really some research gold. And that was, in my survey research, has been with or from nonprofit board members. And so I asked them, hey, board members, you're being criticized for a lack of performance. So why is it you bunch of slackers are not doing what you're supposed to do? And they told me. So I found the reasons why once good board members get turned off. And then they identified all of those influencing situations. And while board members, and they blame the organizations they're working for. They blame, when I mentioned earlier about having a positive board experience, they say, well, thanks to the relationship missteps that the nonprofit staff continuously make, our board experience is not so great. And so once good board members are getting turned off, and there are a number of other mistakes that they help me identify that the organizations are making. So very clearly, nonprofit staff are pointing the finger of blame to their board members for not performing like they're supposed to. And on the other hand, nonprofit board members are pointing the finger of blame at the organizations they signed up to serve for not creating a positive board experience. So that's where the blame game comes from, and the two fingers of blame that's on the cover of the book. They're both blaming each other.
Yes.
So what the book does, from the board member perspective, it's here's how to fix it. And so I don't just say, well, here's a problem. Well, duh, everybody knows there's a problem. It's here's what the specific problems are. Here's why the problems exist. And here are the solutions on how to fix those problems. So at the end of the day, by taking advantage of these lessons and the action steps that are offered, here's how that board member relationships between staff and board can be positive, can be productive, and an organization can benefit from a fully engaged board that is considered a high value asset. And that's what the whole book is all about. Yeah.
Well, I would say that congratulations on the Amazon bestseller part.
Thank you very much.
First off, that's a great accomplishment. Second, the blame game's happening in more places than just between board members and staff. So I would say that this probably is applicable in any workplace or beyond. So thank you, Hardy. I appreciate your time.
Well, thank you so very much. And anyone you would ask about, where's the book available? It's available on Amazon. So check out Amazon right there. Just go to Amazon books, stop the nonprofit board blame game. Also on my website, hardysmith.com. You can find it there.
Perfect. Hey, any parting advice for listeners?
Well, I think we've covered a whole lot of ground today. So I would maybe go back and if you've got the time, or I would suggest, let me go a little bit harder on that. Make the time to listen to this. Get some kind of old school notepad and pen, or new school writing pad, iPad or something, and make notes. And how can you apply what Greg and I have talked about today, and apply the lessons and maybe some of the stories to your own particular situation? Because it does, this conversation today, I can confidently say, has transcended a number of different categories. Thank you for a chance to visit with you. Thank you, Greg.
Absolutely. Well, thank you. You've heard it, everybody. Take action, write things down, and make a difference. All right. Thanks, Hardy. You have a good one. All right.
Super. Greg, thank you very much.
Okay. We'll talk to you. Bye-bye.
Greg Sheldon here, your host of Metal, Steel, Manufacturing, and Business Pro podcast, where you learn everything about the metals and manufacturing industry that make your modern day life possible.